Hi, and welcome to the Miami Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Omar De Windt, Communications Executive at Cervera Real Estate. Today, we are having a conversation all about negotiation. Joining me here in the studio for that talk is a man who has negotiated over 3,000 transactions throughout his career, is the chairman of the board for the Miami Association of Realtors and broker of record for Stratwell. That is none other than Eddie Blanco. Eddie, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. As I mentioned right before we got started, the Miami Real Estate Podcast has never covered in detail negotiation, the art of negotiation. So I think our listeners will benefit tremendously from your experience and expertise.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So today we're going to break down the topic, and I'd like to say into two sort of categories, right? Two buckets. The first of which is negotiations as it occurs between the agents and their customers, whether it be buyers or sellers. And then we can get into sort of negotiation strategies when you're agent to agent, when you're trying to close a deal, right? Sure. Let's start from the top then with number one. Your team provided me with some great questions, so we kind of read off here. It's been about a year now, Eddie, since the NAR settlement really shook up how we talk about compensation in residential real estate. So what has changed, in your opinion, in the way that agents are approaching these conversations with their customers?
Well, now as a result of the NAR settlement, buyers and their agents have to have a conversation around compensation because the settlement requires that there be an agreement in place prior to having meaningful work done as a realtor. So the question of, what services are you providing as a realtor? What can the customer expect? And who is going to pay their fee, and how is it going, and what that fee is going to be, and what the arrangement around that fee is.
Of course.
And that conversation needs to happen up front prior to any real meaningful negotiation.
Of course. And so how do you coach your agents around articulating their value proposition, whether it be when they're at the listing appointment or they're getting that buyer broker agreement signed with their prospective buyer?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the first part is to really understand your value. And I think this settlement has really challenged our realtors to become better, more proficient in understanding the value they bring to a buyer. And really it's more than just knowing, what's out there or finding the right property for them. Consumers today can find properties. That's not what realtors bring to the table. Realtors bring expertise and market knowledge that goes beyond what you see on a screen. If I were to say to a realtor in Miami, hey, where can I find a condominium with ocean view? I want valet service. I want a full amenity spa. I want concierge level amenities. Where can I find that? Give me the name of 3 buildings. And a realtor needs to know, a good realtor that brings the value needs to know that and needs to know how to answer that question and understands the difference between a view on the 17th floor versus a 30th floor.
Sure.
And to guide the customer through that negotiation process is key. But I think that's really where the value an agent brings to the market.
Sure. So really knowing their market, being an expert. Do you feel that buyers and sellers now, post NAR 1 year later, generally understand the value that an agent offers? What's the sense that you're getting?
I mean, that's a broad statement, and so in the broad sense, my guess is that there's probably a little bit more confusion today than there was prior to the settlement. But what's interesting is that they're having the conversations about, what is it exactly that you're doing for me, and what is the value that I see in that, and how much do you expect me to pay you for those services? And those conversations are being had, and real estate brokerages and agents are reassessing, what do the customers really want, and how do we meet them where they're at, and how do we give them the value that they're looking for? And that's a good conversation to always be having. And it's also brought to light that compensation and business strategies have always been negotiable and have always been flexible.
Sure.
And there's been a wide variety of services and compensation models for a long time, and those continue to exist and maybe are getting a little bit more refined today.
Right. So, and let's go a little bit deeper into that conversation, Eddie. So let's role play a bit. So let's say I'm your customer, right? I'm your potential buyer, and you're explaining to me the buyer broker representation agreement. And you're saying, hey, Omar, I'm going to charge X%, which may or may not be covered by the seller. And if it's not, covered by the seller, then you as my as my buyer's agent, sorry, you as my buyer would would need to cover either part or whole of what I charge.
Correct.
And then I say to you, Eddie, well, okay, I understand. I'm kind of used to, in my mindset, I remember thinking or assuming that sellers cover that compensation. But so what are you doing for me exactly that that I would be paying for? Like, what's the value of you as my buyer's agent?
Well, the biggest value is the things unseen, the things unknown, right? So in a negotiation, a real estate transaction, it happens multiple times throughout the transaction. It's not the first time we come to the property and make an offer. First, we get the offer accepted, right? But then there's the inspection period. And during that inspection period, there may be more negotiations to be had. There's also the appraisal. At the time of the appraisal, there may be some renegotiation. There's sometimes down the road, right before closing, you need a little bit more time, or you want to move in sooner, or you want to move in later, and you want to figure that out and negotiate occupancy terms or those type of things. So there's a lot of steps throughout the process that will help you navigate through that. And it's really helping bringing together your CPA, maybe the title agency, the lender, and bringing all these different complex professions together to really figure out what the best strategy is for you. Finding a home and writing an offer, that isn't what you're paying me for. You're paying me for the support and the negotiations throughout the whole transaction to get the ultimate result, which is the right price, the right home for you.
I like that. Very well said. So let's keep this going, Eddie. When it comes to the negotiation, because I get the sense, we mentioned at the top, you've done over 3,000 transactions. So there's a lot of negotiating points throughout the deal. But let's start at the beginning of the deal. Let's say you are the buyer's agent. Your goal, of course, is to get the best price for your buyer. What are you looking at when you're assessing the subject property that your buyer wants, they love, they want to move in? What are some of your key tricks, and not tricks, but tips, I should say, or strategies to come at the right price and get them the best deal?
All right, that's fair. Well, first of all, let's start with that, because sometimes getting the best price that's an assumptive position, right? Sometimes getting the best price isn't the buyer's objective. Sometimes getting that property is their biggest objective, and price isn't as important to them. So sometimes it's I want this property, and then so you're there trying to figure out how you can get it at the best price. Then they miss out on the opportunity, and then they're like, "How did I get the property?" Well, because someone else came and paid more. Well, how did I not know that was an option for me? So it's really about understanding the customers, what their goal is.
Sure.
And if price is it, then let's talk about price. But then you have to go to the other side and talk to the agent. What is the seller's highest level of motivation? If theirs is price and the buyer's is price, there might be a challenge there. But sometimes the seller might be motivated by other things, maybe terms, maybe they needed all cash transaction, maybe they need to stay in the house post closing. Maybe there's some concessions that the buyer can make to the seller that have a substantial value proposition for and can be met by the buyer.
Sure.
So the buyer can get their price, but the seller can get the other terms that were important to them.
Right. And at what point in the conversation then are you reaching out to the seller's agent to sort of assess, let's say, the seller's motivations and how much wiggle room? Like, what are some of the keys that you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a quick conversation to have up front. I think prior to making that phone call, as an agent, I need to know what my buyer's goals are. But I also need to understand what's really happening in the marketplace. It would be foolish of me to call the agent and just kind of randomly throw out what, I mean, obviously you start with a general question and see if there's an opening, but if there's no opening, then more specific questions. My buyer was thinking about coming around here or thinking about this. Would they notice these particular comps? And we're wondering, how did your seller arrive at this price if we have these particular sales that happened? And by the way, did you see these other listings that just came on the market? And have that conversation, like creating some, if you have that expertise, bringing that expertise and creating some concern or doubt in the seller's agent's mind about where they're positioned so that you can prepare that negotiation strategy.
I like that. So, Eddie, when it comes to negotiation, what is the first thing you try to teach newer agents, especially when emotions and money are on the line? Where should they start? Is this understanding the objectives, or is there more to it?
It's funny that you said, especially when emotions are on the line, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Keep the emotions out of it. what happens is, especially for a newer agent, they get really excited. This is, they're there. Oh my God, I'm finally gonna, make this happen. And they get so they take it so personal that their outcome is, they're very attached to the outcome. And you can't be so attached to the outcome, to your outcome, which is get this deal done, right? You got to really be focused on the customer's outcome. And are you getting them the objective they want? And also, how flexible and willing are you to kind of work with the seller's outcome? Because if you're like, I'm only on the buyer's side, so I only care about the buyer's objectives, you're missing the point. Your buyer's objective is to get the property. And if making some adjustments to the seller to meet the seller's objectives happen, so you can get them closer together, that's the goal. Sure. So a lot of times egos get in the way between brokers and agents. And so sometimes, just having that conversation of, hey, I'm here to, let's put this together. I hear sometimes people tout, hey, I've been doing this much, I've sold this many properties, I know what I'm doing, and kind of doing that belittling game of, you don't want to go into that space. You want to keep it in a professional and non-personal business relationship between the two brokers, and ultimately try not to anticipate what the client may say. I'd say, hey, this is where they're at. Where are your people at? Okay, cool. Let me take it to them. Sure. Instead of saying, well, if I take it, they're going to do this. No, let me just take it to them. Yeah. Here's where they're at, and kind of use that. Take it back to the customer. Don't necessarily take it back to the customer. Have a conversation with the customer, but don't create the battle between the agents. Yeah. Right. Keep that amicable and professional, and let the buyer and seller make the decision of how they want to steer the negotiations. Sure, that makes sense. And then what have you seen in terms of when it comes to negotiation strategies shifting in this environment? Are there certain strategies that don't work anymore or are now more important than ever? Well, now more important than ever, it depends on what side are you on, right? If you're on the seller side, now more important than ever is really understanding your competition. Inventory has increased in South Florida. Mm-hmm. There's more properties on the market, and there are more picky and fewer buyers. So you have to be positioned to understand that. So pricing, aligning your property and features to the market is important. So that's important on that side. And on the buyer side, have realistic expectations about where we're going to go. Yes, it might be a buyer's market, but we're not in a, we're in a buyer's market. We're not in a serious downturn or anything like that. We have real perspective. No crazy low balls. Yeah, don't come up with these crazy low balls, because a crazy low ball really it sets up the negotiations usually for failure. Right. And then let's say you come to an agreement, you get that initial offer price accepted. Now, you mentioned earlier on there's certain sticking points during inspection period or whatnot where there's another room for negotiation. So let's say if you're working on behalf of the buyer, again, we'll stick with that, the inspection comes back. What are some of the most common points that you've seen, and how have you maybe some examples of where you've successfully achieved a better outcome for the buyer, or even saved the deal that was at peril because of the inspection? Let's start with the buyer side. On the buyer side, most contracts that I write are going to be as is with the right to inspect. So there's no harm, right? The buyer has the opportunity to come and ask for a concession. And the seller is in a position where the seller can either say yes or no, but the seller can't say no, and I don't want to sell my house to you anymore. The seller's still under the obligation. Right. The buyer has a unilateral opportunity to cancel the contract during that inspection period. So no harm in saying, hey, can you pay to replace the roof? Right. Seller may say no, but I'm willing to do this. And it's just a free ask. There's strategy to that and understanding that, but asking doesn't hurt, and it's not going to affect the seller's position. So that's a strategy that doesn't hurt to ask. Sure. So do your inspections, come with the inspection report, and ask for a credit almost every time, because there's no harm in asking. If they say no, they say no. You keep moving forward, or you decide to move out. Right. Of the contract. And on the seller side, there was a time where there was an air conditioning unit that had lived past its life expectancy. It was still operating. It was still cooling, but the buyer wanted the seller to replace the AC or pay for the cost of replacing AC. And what I was able to negotiate instead was that seller paid for a home warranty for the AC, because the AC was operable. was still in good condition. It was just aged and could potentially fail at some future point. Well, this warranty covered that. It was a couple $100 versus several $1,000s. The seller was happy. The buyer was happy. We moved forward into the transaction. So sometimes finding creative ways around what they really want. What they really wanted, the buyer, was a sense of peace of mind that they weren't going to have an unexpected large bill.
Right.
In a couple of months.
So it's in a way getting creative, where just again, it goes back to understanding the objectives or the concerns, let's say, of the buyer. And it's not really so much that it has to be a new AC, but they don't want to be on the hook if the AC were to break, right? And thus the warranty is sort of, it's a win-win for both sides.
Yep.
What about, you know, transactions that unfortunately fall apart? We've all seen some that fall apart for something that maybe has nothing to do with price. What are some of those obstacles, and how do you help navigate those obstacles to get the transaction to close?
Yeah, like a piano or a light fixture or a fan. We've seen it happen. So, you know, if there's a matter of the property that's important to the seller or to the buyer, it's very important that those be discussed up front and not to leave them to assumptions. I had a transaction where there was a piano and the buyer had mentioned their interest in the piano, but they never wrote it into the contract. And then when we got to closing, they said that, you know, that was a matter of importance.
Sure.
So it was never spoken to me in the negotiation that they wanted that piano, and it wasn't included in the contract. Had we had that conversation up front, hey, you know, let's make sure that we get that piano in there, we could have solved that. Could have solved that problem from happening. So I think just being very clear in communication and not trying to pull fast ones, because I've seen that happen. Like an example recently, we had a property, it's tenant occupied. We went under contract. The terms of the way the offer was written specify that the seller is going to have that property vacant, but it's tenant occupied. So there's a confusion there.
Sure.
So we can wait and then say, hey, the contract said, at the last minute, and then hold them to that contract terms. Or we can just say, hey, hold on a second. I think there's a misunderstanding here. You have a tenant, but the language in the contract says they're going to be out. So are they going to be out or not? Let's make sure we clarify that. Well, it was a mistake. The agent representing the seller made a mistake. And had that not been clarified up front, we would have had, you know, to jump through hoops at the last minute, had upset customers. We just clarified it up front, and we were able to get it clarified and documented the right way, and the tenants will be out. The owner now knows, and they're going to do that, and that's not a problem. But had we let that get, you know, to the end, it'd have been a lot messier. Right. A lot more variables in place.
Sure. And now let's talk about I think we mentioned that we're now sort of in a buyer's market, where it's not a post-pandemic where you had multiple offers within a couple of days going over asking price, but bidding wars still do happen. And that's the question that I'm getting to. How do you handle on the seller side? What are your tips to agents on, you know, navigating a bidding war?
So if you're on a seller side,
you got multiple offers coming in, and how are you prioritizing? How are you communicating with the other agents and with your sellers to achieve your seller's best outcome?
Yeah, almost in most cases, at least and I think this varies depending on the type of property you're selling, the price point. There are variables, but in the way I handle that, we generally are going to be in a multiple offer situation, and we're going to request final and best offers from everybody, giving everybody an opportunity to make their final and best offer. And then once we get to those, we'll pick the top couple of those, and then basically, with the seller's permission, go to the different ones and see if I can pin one offer against the other and say, hey, we have another offer here. If your buyer can get to here, the seller wants to move forward with that one. You know, so there might be one that the price is where it needs to be, but the terms aren't quite where they need to be. And we can get the other one with the better terms but lower price to meet or beat that offer. And so we've been able to successfully negotiate doing it that way.
Interesting. Yeah. So communicating with the seller, getting consent, of course, because you obviously can't be disclosing prices and whatnot.
Right.
And then final and best offers with, I think it goes back to something you mentioned at the beginning too. It's as transaction brokers, which most of the times agents are operating as transaction brokers, right? Versus single agent. And so the deal is sort of at the the successful outcome of the deal is sort of the main responsibility, with benefit and limited confidentiality and whatnot to both sides. I may have misquoted that a bit, but
that's fair.
But keeping that in mind, having a non-adversarial communication and relationship with the other agents is going to help you sort of get to these to the finish line with no hard feelings
and a better outcome.
Yeah,
and even in single agency, if they're both single agents and they're looking out for their client's best interest and they have a fiduciary, there are certain things you can and cannot do. There's disclosure, there's obedience, there's certain things that could make it a little bit more challenging. But ultimately, being kind and professional and having good communication is just that's the baseline. That's where everybody should start.
Sure, absolutely. Is there anything related to negotiation that we haven't covered here? Any master class tips or just anything you want to add on negotiation?
No, I think that the main points that we've covered them, which is keep the emotion out of it, have good communication, understand what your client's goals and objectives are, ask lots of questions about what their goal and objectives are to really understand the core of what they are. Right? Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I want the best price. I want the best price." So then you say, "Okay, you want the best price, but if you missed out on the house because you were going for the best price, would that be okay with you?" "Oh, no, then that's not." So then it's not best price. You really want this house. Yeah. So you want this house at the best price, but you want the house. You're not willing to miss out on this one. So having that discussion, and sometimes for a couple of $1,000 or $10,000, you lose perspective of really what now you're hunting for a new home. You're starting all over again, and for $5,000 or $10,000 you gave up on the ideal dream home. That's not a good win. So staying clear about what the objective is, and staying emotionally neutral in the process, and then the understanding the other side's objectives and working through communication to get everybody moving in the right direction, get them closer together. Every conversation, get the seller and buyer closer together, and hopefully where you need them.
I like that. In addition to your role at the Association of Realtors, you're also the broker of record at Stratwell, as we mentioned at the top. How are you helping agents get more confident when it comes to negotiation? Is it about mindset, tools, training?
I think it's about all of them. Mindset is probably the most important, but you need tools and training. You really, to be effective in negotiation, you really have to understand the product. If you don't know what you're selling and you don't know what the competition is, you're really not in a position to negotiate. So you really have to understand what your seller and buyer have to lose if they get this offer accepted or don't, and what the alternatives are. Which is a tactic I've used before, more I've used it on the buyer's side, where you say to this buyer, if we miss out on this opportunity to get this house, the next property that's similar to these features is priced here. So, if we miss out on this one, the next best opportunity is there. And now the reverse is true for sellers, right? So if we miss out on this buyer, we have these other properties. They have all these other properties to go look at. If they don't get this property at this price, they can see this one or this one or this one. They're pretty comparable. So you have to understand, but that takes market knowledge.
Sure.
So going back to it, like mindset, but you really have to have the tools and the skills. In fact, Miami Association of Realtors, since the settlement in our new headquarters, I don't know if you've been there yet, but it's worth a drive.
When did that open? Because last I went was like 7 years ago.
Okay, no. So the new HQ it's catty corner to where the old headquarters was.
Okay.
This is the new headquarters. It's a building just for our realtor members. We have trained over 20,000 people at that headquarters since it opened a year ago. So it's been a well-used building. It's fantastic. It's got a big a ballroom style, like humongous room that fits about 300 people, a training lab that has about 85 stations, and another computer training lab, and then another training center that has another 100 some odd seats in it. So really cool.
What are the tools and the education that the Realtors is offering to members on this topic and others?
Oh, there's tons. You can go to the Miami Realtors website, MiamiRealtors.com, and they have all the education with thousands of classes.
I love that.
It's crazy.
And speaking of training and tools, Cervera Real Estate offers a robust tech suite and our in-house Cervera Academy training. Want to give a plug to surveyor of real estate that produces the podcast and pays the bills.
Of course.
So thank you. So you got the surveyor, you got the association, you have Stratwell, a lot of options for our realtors, our audience out there. So Eddie, as we wind this down and looking ahead, how do you think negotiation will keep evolving? What should agents be thinking about now to stay ahead of the curve in this new era of transparency?
Okay. So yeah, that it'll always be changing, right? We're always going to be evolving because the market's always evolving. So if you're going to be in negotiations, you have to really understand the product that you're negotiating with, and understand all the variables, all the different levers that you can pull and push in this market. For example, now buyers are very rate sensitive, right? And sellers are, and there's a buyer's market. So sellers may be willing to come down on price in concessions that buyers can then use to buy down mortgage rates. And there's a lever that you can be used that wasn't a viable lever before. So understanding as the market's changing, what are those variables and what are new levers that can be used in the negotiation process is important. And so keeping on top of that, keeping on top of the education, listening to podcasts like this and others to really keep yourself engaged in what's happening in the marketplace, that's the key.
I love that. Before I let you go, the Association of Realtors is one of the largest local organizations or the largest, right, in the country, over 60,000 members. You guys are a big advocating force. What are some of the big issues, if you're allowed to say, that you guys are sort of looking at moving ahead for the rest of this year, maybe into next year, that are sort of top of mind?
Yeah. So we are constantly, in an evolving market. And so we're keeping ahead of everything that's coming. And we have been on the lobbying side and in the legislation side, moving things forward in ways that most realtors aren't aware of. At the National Association of Realtors, they lobbied for the One Beautiful Bill to make sure that 1031 exchanges were protected. That was on the chopping block. And most people don't realize that. And we were able to lobby and get that kept into place. The ability to write off your interest deductions, that was on the chopping block. We also kept that in place. The increase in independent contractor, the ability for an independent contractor to write off a higher amount now in their expenses, a higher percentage off in their expenses. We're able to add that into the discussion regarding that bill. So that's just at the National Association of Realtors level. At the local, we lobbied recently to remove business rent tax. Business rent tax, Florida was the only state with business rent tax. So business owners were paying a tax to the state for renting business space. Wow. And so just this last bill, we got that eliminated.
So that's no longer as of when?
As of just June, just in June. It was
that applies to all commercial
leases. Yeah.
No longer paying tax.
No longer is paying business rent tax.
Interesting.
Correct. Yeah. So these are the type of things that the Miami Association of Realtors, and sometimes in partnership with the Florida Association of Realtors or the National Association of Realtors, is lobbying for at the local and state level. So these are the type of things that some of the things you don't realize. Like, for example, City of Miami was moving forward a bill in legislation here in the City of Miami to require reoccupancy inspections, as do some other cities require it now. We were able to step in and talk to them, explain to them what the risk of doing that are and why they shouldn't do it, and we were able to get that off the dais, and it was a win for our Miami members, and more importantly for our Miami public, because it's not a good thing for Miami residents.
Sure.
So yeah, those are the type of things that we continue to move forward, always on the forefront of what's happening on the legislative side, to make sure that those things are there. And then on the education side, AI, we're bringing a lot of AI education in place. So we're training around what AI can do to our industry, how realtors can use it to really expand their capacity. So we're doing trainings around that. So a lot of opportunities coming. I definitely encourage any realtor who's watching to dig in and see what Miami Realtors has to offer in terms of training, because you'll be surprised. There's some really good stuff.
What was the website again?
MiamiRE.com.
MiamiRE.com. They can find training there. I would be remiss if I let you go without asking it. There was recently, I think it was this week or last week, the Florida Senate passed a couple bills related to condos.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you guys had anything to do with that in the lobbying, but
yes, we have.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the elevator summary of what those were, or how they what it means for the owners.
Yeah. Okay. So not having the Senate numbers and all the bill
Sure.
numbers, I don't have those.
We can keep it casual.
Keep it over the top.
40,000 feet.
40,000 feet level. Well, what we want is basically more transparency. So there's some changes in that now associations can have digital voting. Like they can vote by email. So if you own a condo and you live in Venezuela, you couldn't be here for the vote, you can vote by email. So there's those changes to the way that's done. Now associations that have reserves can invest those reserves in investment vehicles. So there's some substantial amount of money there. There's some safe harbor. There's restrictions around it, but there is a vehicle under which now by law the associations can have it professionally manage their money. So there's some vehicles for that. There was those are the two that stick off the top of my head, right.
I believe there was one related to assessments and extending or financing.
There's a one more year extension. It's another year extension of the requirements. It was through last year December. Now it's through this year.
Got it.
So that extension was put in place. There's also a My Safe Home condo where a condo association could apply to get a grant from the state to make repairs to the building. It's limited, but it's help. And there's some revisions to the rules around how that can be done. So a lot of great stuff. And we at Miami Realtors, we happen to have Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez, who's part of our team. She's on our staff. She's a fantastic leader. And we've had several legislators come to our headquarters and give talks about the benefits. We had a condo summit. That's what I'm saying. Like there's a lot of things. Everybody's kind of in their own little world. But if you tap into what Miami Realtors has, there's a lot of leverage there for realtors to use. It's not just access to the MLS. It's not just training for new agents. It's very robust. So I encourage all realtors to check it out.
I like it. I love it. And we're going to leave it there. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eddie Blanco, chairman of the board for the Miami Association of Realtors and broker for Stratwell, covering negotiation. Really appreciate having your insights here.
Thank you.
And all the, sharing your experience and expertise with us. Hope our listeners take away a lot of valuable tips. Before I let you go, I want to remind everybody that the Miami Real Estate Podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are still the #1 rated Miami Real Estate Podcast in Florida. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Make sure to follow the Miami Association of Realtors, Eddie on social. Take advantage of that training, and we'll see you very soon. Until then, remember that here in Miami, the future is always bright. Take care, folks.